that. So thank you, Eileen. I love that you're staying on top of this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Being mindful.
That's right. So what I was going to say is one of the things we'll talk about today, Maureen, is a form of or a system of mindfulness practice called United Mindfulness. And they define mindfulness as having three core skills: concentration power, sensory clarity, and equanimity. And I've got it written down here, but I want to really be clear on what they call it. So when we get to it, um, I'll go more deeply into what each one of the, what I want to say, the skills are and how we can deepen them, because we'll be focusing on that today. So yeah, I guess you really need to have some sense of your own about what mindfulness is, so that then you can apply it to really whatever you're doing, regardless. So, and welcome, Holly. So, Ginny.
No, I'm saying hi to Holly.
Okay. Anybody else want to have a question or comment about your practice or anything that we have been going over? Carol?
This isn't exactly meditation, but if you're doing a loving kindness meditation, or I mentioned in that email, conscious something or other. Anyway, it was similar to loving kindness, but picking someone that you had issues with, and that was that Headspace video thing. And he talked about trying to identify what that other person was struggling with.
Okay.
So I was trying to apply that to our president, and I could figure out things he was struggling with, admitting the truth of a situation, but I'm not, somehow that isn't making me feel warm and caring toward him. So just making that observation.
How interesting. And I think that, well, some psychologists have deemed him as insane. Okay. That being the case, you don't want to be warm and compassionate towards the insanity, but maybe towards the person who, because I think the Buddhist perspective, which I really love, is that the bottom line is everyone wants to be happy. They may go about it in horrible ways.
A good point.
But everybody wants to be happy. So he's doing what he thinks will make him happy, regardless of anyone else.
You can always respect the spirit or the soul in a person.
Yeah.
Their personality you may hate or not like, or it may irritate you.
Sure.
But you can respect the spiritual part of them.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you, Carol, for that observation. And I appreciate your trying to find ways to be compassionate no matter what. Okay, anybody else? Any comments or question? Okay, I guess not. All right, so last week we talked about, and it was part one of how to calm a busy mind. And so what we did was to talk about the most important quality that we need to bring if we want to calm down the mind is a positive attitude and bringing kindness to our practice. So we pointed to the practice of ways to gladden the mind, practicing loving kindness meditation, which is one. So the question is, why do we practice? And as I said a little while ago, we all want to be happy. And I wanted to read to you something that was written by a man named Wes Nisker, because he wrote Why I Meditate. And of course, I left the paper right over here, so I have to go and get it. He's the author of Essential Everyday Crazy Wisdom. And he's also a radio commentator. Could everybody hear me as I was walking away and talking?
Yes.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Thank you. So the only thing I'll explain is because he mentions it during this little why I meditate. Um, it's called the Brahma Viharas, which is, he calls, or it's also called the four divine abodes. My favorite description of it is the four sublime attitudes. It's also called the four immeasurables, and in Buddhism it's called the Brahma Viharas. So it's love, joy, empathy, and equanimity. So those are the four. Okay, so now you have an understanding of that. Let's just start with why I meditate. I meditate because I suffer. I suffer, therefore I am. I am, therefore I meditate. I meditate because there are so many other things to do. I meditate because when I was younger, it was all the rage. I meditate because Siddhartha Gautama, Bodhidharma, Marco Polo, the British Raj, Carl Jung, Alan Watts, Jack Kerouac, Alfred E. Newman, et al. I meditate because evolution gave me a big brain, but didn't come with an instruction manual. I meditate because I have all the information I need. I meditate because the largest calories of living beings, the coral reefs, are dying. The largest colonies of coral reefs are dying. I meditate because I want to touch deep time, where the history of humanity can be seen as just an evolutionary adjustment period. I meditate because life is too short, and sitting down slows it down. I meditate because life is too long, and I need an occasional break. I meditate because I want to experience the world as Rumi did, or Walt Whitman, or as Mary Oliver did. I meditate because now I know that enlightenment doesn't exist, so I can relax. I meditate because the Dalai Lama laughs. I meditate because there are too many advertisements in my head, and I'm erasing all but the very best of them. I meditate because the physicists say there may be 11 dimensions to reality, and I want to get a peek into a few more of them. I meditate because I've discovered that my mind is a great toy, and I like to play with it. That's one of my favorite ones. My mind is a great toy, and I like to play with it. It really is. I meditate because I want to remember that I'm perfectly human. Sometimes I meditate because my heart is breaking. Sometimes I meditate so that my heart will break. I meditate because a Vedanta master once told me that my Hindi name Niskar meant non-doer. I meditate because I'm growing old and I want to be more comfortable with emptiness. I meditate because I think Robert Thurman was right to call it an evolutionary sport, and I want to be on the home team. I meditate because I'm composed of 100 trillion cells, and from time to time, I need to reassure them that we're all in this together. I meditate because it's such a relief to spend time ignoring myself. I like that one a lot too. I meditate because my country spends more money on weapons than all other nations in the world combined. If I had more courage, I'd probably immolate myself. I meditate because I want to discover the fifth Brahma Vihara. Remember I said there were four. The divine abode of awe. And then go down in history as a great spiritual adept. Talk about ego. And the last one, I meditate because I'm building myself a bigger and better perspective, and occasionally I need to add a new window. So I bet you could find at least one of those reasons that you meditate. And in fact, it's really important when we sit down to meditate to remember why we're meditating. As my teacher, Jumpo, says, it's important, meditation is important. Knowing why you're meditating is just as important. So that when you start to lose motivation, you start like, why am I bothering to do this? Then you can remember your motivation. So that's why when you sit down to meditate, it's good to set an intention. What's my goal? Then you let go of that because you don't want to have any goals while you're meditating. But remembering your intention or what you do want to get out of it will help to keep you sustaining a practice. Okay. So this week we're also talking about calming a busy mind. And I'm going to talk about working directly with thoughts and how we can do that. And one of the things is we notice when we first sit down to meditate, especially for beginners, that we may notice how busy the mind is. And we also frequently will notice how unpleasant our thoughts are. And it's much harder to slow down your mind when you're having a lot of unpleasant thoughts. So I don't know, for some of you I've shared this before, but I think it's just really almost hilarious. There's a study done at University of Kentucky, and it showed that people would rather shock themselves than sit alone in a room with their own thoughts. And I'll just share with you because it makes sense after you listen to what the instructions. So they're asked to sit alone for 15 minutes, that's all, with no access to phones or books or any other distraction. And in the room there was a device that gave a harmless but uncomfortable shock, electric shock. So everybody agreed to experience one shock at the beginning of the session. And after feeling it, they all stated that if necessary, they would give money to prevent more shocks. But additional shocks were an option, okay. Participants were asked only to remain seated and to stay awake and to entertain themselves with their thoughts for the next 15 minutes. The researchers expected that people might appreciate the chance to sit quietly and think, but most participants rated their experience as boring and unpleasant. Even more interesting is 12 of the 18 men in the study and 6 of the 24 women voluntarily gave themselves at least one shock during the 15-minute period. And several shocked themselves 3 or 4 times in 15 minutes. I just think that's hilarious. God forbid, leave me alone in a room with just my thoughts. Yes, Aline.
I wonder if they did that to wake themselves up.
Well, what they said was that they didn't want to have to pay attention to these unpleasant thoughts, you know, and so they could distract themselves by giving themselves a shock. That's why we meditate, so we don't have to give ourselves an electric shock when we have unpleasant thoughts. In fact, I'll read what Ruth Baer, she's the developer of the 5-point mindfulness questionnaire. You can go online, it's in a common, and test yourself to see just how mindful you are. So it's the 5 facets of mindfulness is what you would Google. Anyway, so what she says, in fact, she wrote an article, the title was Alone with Your Thoughts, How Mindfulness Makes It Better Than Shocking Yourself. So anyway, so what she says is, mindfulness won't get rid of unpleasant thoughts. Instead, mindfulness teaches us to be less bothered by our unpleasant thoughts and less controlled by them. So people who practice mindfulness of thoughts learn to be unfazed by any thought that comes into your mind. Okay, that's why I was talked about, you know, how cute it is to have your mind as a toy. Anyway, she goes on to say, people who practice mindfulness recognize that some thoughts are helpful and others aren't. And she says they're more creative, more insightful, and better problem solvers, and they have more positive emotions and feel more socially connected. So there. Now, hopefully one of those things will motivate you to want to keep practicing. Okay, so there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's a form or system of mindfulness called Unified Mindfulness. And as I said, they broke down or defined mindful awareness as concentration power, sensory clarity, and equanimity. So you can think of concentration power as the ability to focus on what you consider relevant at any given time. And sensory clarity is the ability to keep track of what you're experiencing in the moment. All right. And equanimity is the ability to allow the sensory experiences to come and go without push and pull. Okay. In other words, a more calm, even temper, allowing whatever's happening to arise and pass away without immediately reacting to it, just allowing it to happen. So the Unified Mindfulness has the system or a technique called see, hear, and feel. And what they do is they break down, I've talked about this before, thoughts are broken down into two components. We hear conversations and words in our mind, and we see images and words in our mind. So that's what a thought is. It's a combination of seeing or hearing, or both. Okay. So now, one of the ways to practice, let me put up on the screen just a share screen. Let's see. Why isn't it right there? Document. Look, here it is. Okay, I found it. Sorry. Too many things open on my screen. There. So here's a diagram that made by Shinzen Young, who is the founder or the developer of Unified Mindfulness. And if you look at the bottom where it says things you can do to optimize happiness and success. And then the next level is practice mindful awareness. So that's one of the things you can do. And noting means noticing what's happening, noticing your sensory experiences in the moment as they're happening. Okay. And what's happening, I mean, to us, either we're seeing something or we're hearing something, and that could be externally or internally, right? Either we're thinking or we're seeing things outside, or we're hearing sounds outside or hearing conversation in our mind. And we're either feeling emotions, and they include the sense of taste and smell because in the body as a feel, because when we smell, it's experienced in the nose, and when we taste, it's experienced in the tongue. So that would be feel. So the idea that they do is you label what you're either seeing, hearing, or feeling, and you do it with, and they call it an equanimity tone. In other words, to label, let's say if I were, in fact, why don't we all practice that right now? I'll take that down. Stop share. Practice just seeing, okay? Because it's easier because we're going to practice later untangling thinking. But before we do that, I think it's easier to get a sense of what the practice is like, and also being mindful when we're seeing if we practice it. So why don't we just what you're going to do is practice just the focus option of see. So what I'd like you to do is to begin to let your eyes roam around the room, and when the eyes land on something, an object, just say to yourself, see. And then allow the eyes to move. Right after you've said the word see, allow the eyes to move, and when the eyes land on the next thing, just say see. So try that for, about 30 seconds. Just saying see, no matter what, every time the eye lands on something. See. And say it with an equanimity tone. The soft, matter-of-fact tone. See. See. And attempt to do it in a rhythmic way that will help to keep you concentrating easier. You need to pick your pace, whatever works for you. So I'll be quiet for the next 30 seconds so that you can practice. Okay. So, anybody have any questions about that exercise? Okay, any comments about how it was for you? Did you notice a shift in your awareness at all, or a shift in your, even your sense of being at all? Dorothy?
I noticed that my eyes were looking for something that would interest me. And
Judgment.
other, and so I've got all these little things. So, and then I was kind of studying that particular object a little bit.
Uh-huh.
And then I developed a rhythm. You like goes 1, 2, 3, 4. Look, 1, 2, 3. But then sometimes my eyes would stop the rhythm and pick out something that they wanted to look at. So interesting.
So you let the object catch you, and
Mm-hmm.
catch your attention.
Yep.
Yeah, yeah. Anybody notice how when you shifted to different things, that there was a different reaction in your body in response to those things? Like either I like it or I don't like it, or I got to clean that, or move that out of the way.
No, I didn't have that. I
Okay.
just went from thing to thing to thing.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't experiencing any judgment.
Oh, okay.
Like there are times when I'm doing Tai Chi and my eyes glance at things and oh my God, I have to dust that.
Right,
But
right.
that didn't happen here.
So I'm wondering if perhaps the label kept you from letting the mind wander to, to some kind of judgment about the object. Yeah, my guess is that's the purpose of the labeling, is
Hmm,
keeping you on task, Yeah.
Nice, I liked it.
Yeah. So anybody have any questions about? Okay. Okay. Let's see. 3. I guess I'll share with you because we have a little time. Yeah, no, not a lot of time. But I thought it was interesting that he, Shinzen Young, and I'll send you out a list of all the resources I used for today. But he talks about why practice mindful awareness and how that affects our sense of happiness. So it should just show right back up. Interesting how it moves around. There we go. As he says, certain aspects of happiness are essentially inaccessible without mindfulness skills. I think is a pretty strong statement. Anyway, he uses an example. The ability to be sensually fulfilled in a boring environment. And that is possible. The ability to escape into pain. Or the ability to deconstruct negative emotions into vibrant energy. Okay. As he said, notice that each of these involves a way of being happy that does not depend on conditions. So that's why I thought that was important to look at that. I mean, he does, and if you go to his page on the See, Hear, Feel introduction, he will talk about the ways that you can, many of the different ways you can break down happiness, let's put it that way. And you'll see at the bottom of this screen, if you're interested at all in trying to learn how to deconstruct negative emotions into vibrant energy, you might want to go to that YouTube page where it's called How Intense Emotions Can Be No Problem. One of the cool things about Shinzen Young and his work is that it's extremely precise. That being the case, there are many universities that use his system to study mindfulness because it's so precise and so clear. So, and also, before I forget, I highly recommend they have a free core skills class that you can take called Unified Mindfulness, and I'll also put that on my list of resources that you can take, and it's really entertaining because it's animated, and it's like 10 minutes a day, and I think there's 10 lessons or something like that, but the introduction to it. So I highly recommend taking that class. Okay. Okay, I think what we'll do now is to shift over and do the untangling thinking guided meditation. Okay, so we'll start with untangling the visual part, and then we'll do the auditory part. Okay, so that's a little bit easier to start with that. So I want to get into a comfortable position. And I'll start by ringing the bell, and you can be getting yourself comfortable and either turn down the lights in your room or turn off the camera if that's more comfortable, whatever feels just right for you. So I invite you to move into this practice with curiosity and maybe even some fascination with how the mind works. And thinking can stimulate the sense of feel, but for this practice, we'll set aside the feel part and put that into a separate practice. So let's take a moment then to find a posture that just feels right for you, relaxed and alert. You want to loosen your shoulders, soften the jaw. And since we're working with thoughts, remembering that it's good to become familiar with the muscles that use thought or thinking. So the tongue uses words, perhaps relaxing the tongue. Seeing if you can relax the tongue. All the way down to its root. Seeing if you can hold the eyes still. And take good 3 deep breaths. Slowing the breath down. And just for this practice, we close our eyes and bring the attention to the area around the closed eyes. Maybe behind the eyelids, or you might sense the area in front of the eyes. And let's call this area the mental screen. Even though it may not look like an actual screen to you, we'll use that name just to have a point of reference. And as you place your attention in that area of the mental screen, you might notice that there are some images playing on that screen. Maybe like a metaphorical TV screen, where there's different images or colors or graphics or even movement. Just notice right now if there are images or any activity on your mental screen. That area in front of or behind closed eyes. And if you see any activity on the mental screen, do your best not to get hooked into it. not trying to figure it out or why it's there or even what it is. For now, we're just interested in the fact that it's there. And you may want to repeat to yourself the word see as a way to keep reminding the mind that we're focusing on the mental images. You may have the experience that the mental screen is blank, not much going on there. And that can be good news because we can experience it as a restful state. So you might again notice one of two things, either some degree of imagery on that mental screen or nothing or very little going on the mental screen. So there's no need to have a preference. This way we can practice non-judgment and equanimity. So doing your best to keep your attention on the mental screen. And if you get pulled into sounds around the room or feelings in the body, just gently come back to that mental screen and notice if there's an image, activity, or if the screen is blank. Each time you bring the attention back, you're building concentration. So what we're exploring is inner seeing, visual thinking. It may be subtle. You may even wonder what you're doing or why you're doing it, or doing it right. If those thoughts come up, just let them go and trust that you're doing just what you need to be doing. And if your experience is subtle, remember that we're training 3 important attentional skills. We're training our ability to put our attention where we choose, which is concentration. Training our ability to notice a difference in our sensory experience, activity versus blank. Noticing the difference helps us build clarity. Clarity about what you're sensing. And if the mind keeps getting distracted, you might try the labeling again. You might just say seeing. Or if you're seeing a lot of images, you might repeat with an equanimous tone, active, active. And if it's blank, you might label it rest, rest, rest. And as we allow our mental screen to do just what it wishes to do right now, and we don't try to control it, interfere with it, or manipulate it, we're just letting things come and go. Image or rest. Allowing what is happening to happen. And we are building equanimity. Other times we may notice that we like the images and we want them to continue, or that we dislike the images and we want them to stop. There are techniques for this, but for this practice we're simply noticing if the mental screen is active or restful. So just another minute of noticing your mental screen in front of the eyes or behind closed eyes. Maybe there's an image, maybe it's blank. If there's an image activity, you don't have to see it clearly like a photograph. It may be wavy like a lava lamp moving around. Maybe not associated with real time. It might be something from the past or something from the future or a fantasy. It's all okay. Just continue to notice whether there's activity on the mental screen or whether it's blank. Now take a couple of breaths to let that go. Just taking a moment to rest and refresh. And before we go on to the auditory component of thinking, I think we'll stop for a moment and just check in and see if there's any questions. Okay. So it looks like there's no questions, so let's move on then to the auditory component of thinking. In this time, bring your attention to the area around the ears, maybe between your ears, in the head, where you're likely to hear mental talk. It could be your own voice, or it could be a dialogue with someone, something you heard on TV. So we're going to call this talk space. Just to give it a name and have a reference for it. So as you bring attention to the talk space, notice if there's some activity in the talk space. The auditory aspect of thoughts. This could be a monologue or perhaps a dialogue. Whether it's your own voice or the voices of others. It could be a kind of mental chatter. And maybe you can't completely discern, sort of like background noise in a room. Doing your best not to get hooked into the content of what is being said, but instead just the idea of how thinking comes in through this channel, through the auditory channel. And if the auditory channel activates images on the mental screen, just let them be there for this practice, so that we can focus on the auditory experience of thinking. Just to notice what's going on here, now. And it could happen that the mental talk or the mental chatter goes quiet for a moment. It may pause. And if that happens, And you notice that it's sensory. You notice that it's sensory clarity. That's mental quiet, peaceful. So again, you're simply keeping your attention on the inner experience of hearing in talk space. You're either noticing mental talk, either it's active or it's quiet. And for this practice,
Down, I gotta go lay down.
you need to turn off your microphone, please.
Okay.
Thank you. So again, you're simply keeping your attention on the inner experience of hearing in talk space. And perhaps there's a mental event happening in your head right now. Again, saying, what am I doing? And why am I doing this? And that's okay. We don't have to interfere with it. We don't have to take it seriously. That's just mental talk, just how the mind works. And no matter what happens, we're developing those 3 skills of concentration, clarity, and equanimity. So now, for just a moment, let your thinking happen naturally. Just let thinking be there. Let the thoughts be there. Notice whether those thoughts are coming in through the visual aspect, the mental screen, or whether they're coming in through the auditory, the thinking, coming into talk space. And if you experience both equally, that's okay too. Just being curious. How does thinking happen? How do we know that we are thinking? And as we do this, we begin to develop a new relationship with thinking and a new relationship with ourselves. And this gives us a simple way of unpacking the thinking experience, especially when it gets overwhelming, so that we can work with our thoughts and work with our thinking mind in partnership. Working with our thinking mind, not as a force to be controlled or reckoned with. The mind becomes our best friend. So as we end this practice, we can gently open our eyes. And I'll finish with the bell. So, anybody want to share how that was for you? If you learned anything about yourself? Anything change?
My mind stays fairly active.
Mm-hmm.
What's on the screen is mostly not images, it's swirling colors.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And sometimes they swirl slowly or, morph into each other. It's actually usually quite beautiful.
How
But,
lovely.
so I was kind of just watching without any commentary.
So it was pleasant, though, is what you're saying too. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that would give you, if I would say, more motivation to want to use that perhaps as a focal point for meditation
Mm.
because it's pleasant. Yeah. Thanks, Allie. Kit, did you want to say something?
Well, I was just a little confused
Okay.
about the talk space thing. Was that supposed to be coming in on the screen too, or was that completely auditory?
Completely auditory. Yeah.
I couldn't really hear anything,
Or imagine.
I guess that didn't work for me,
Yeah.
the talk space thing.
Okay. Were you able to imagine? Did you like, in other words, was there were thoughts that were happening like I'm confused or I don't know is what I think I hear you saying is that the thoughts that you were having were I'm not sure if this is what I'm supposed to be doing or where's the thought
Yes,
supposed to come from. So
I was confused about the process.
yeah. So those thoughts that you were having of I'm confused, those would have been something that you would have said that you would have focused on and yeah and maybe I didn't mention it because I this is an adapted from guided meditation and I don't think she did not mention um, using labeling to say hearing so each time you had that thought of am I doing it right or is this doesn't seem like I don't understand then you could have said hearing. In other words,
Oh,
hearing that
okay.
thought, yeah. And that
Okay.
might have made it easier to
Okay.
pay attention to a thought. Yeah.
Okay.
In fact, I think that I wish I had, I'll make sure I include that and write that down right now. So when I do it next time, I include label hearing. Hearing.
Yeah, I like the labeling. And at one point, I developed an itch, I think, on my neck,
Uh-huh.
about to scratch it when instead I said feeling,
Ah, okay. Yeah.
because that's the labeling of
Sensation, body sensation.
yeah.
Yeah.
I learned that from this meditation app that I use.
Oh, is that right? I wonder if they've picked up some of that from the Unified Mindfulness System, you know. But yeah, labeling can be really helpful to
Yeah,
help us concentrate. But
yeah, yeah, I agree.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, Dorothy, you were going to say something?
I like the hearing one because I was listening to some higher vibrations, and then I was listening to all the sounds that I hear out in nature.
Mm-hmm.
The water, the trees, the rain, the wind blowing. And then I thought the having, what was it? You had a mental screen.
Mm-hmm. That would
And then on the screen, I saw my son who fractured his ankle was sitting in the woods, and all the green energy from the trees and the grasses and everything was healing his ankle. And then it changed. He went out of the picture, and the earth was there, and the earth was being healed. And after that, my heart was there, being healed.
oh,
So
beautiful.
that was quite quite interesting, I thought.
And lovely. Um, The only thing is that during the hearing part, um, the idea and that exercise was to only respond to the hearing that you heard in terms of words or conversations in your mind. So if you heard sounds around you, is to ignore them and come back to only what you were hearing in your mind.
That was in my mind.
Okay. Oh, the sound you heard around you was in your mind. Okay. Okay. So it was a thought of hearing sounds.
It was a memory of, I guess,
Okay.
the
Okay.
sounds that I hear when I'm out in nature.
Okay. Oh,
But it was like I was right there hearing them.
oh, okay. Wonderful. Yeah. Great. So that's the exercise then. Anybody else have any more questions?
Donna, so the talk space isn't really like a conversation that you had with anybody.
Could be.
It's not a real, oh, and then you're thinking about it now?
Right, right, right.
Okay. So it has to be a conversation, or it has to be something you heard, either through conversation or, like Dorothy said, she could remember hearing this.
Mm-hmm.
But
Or,
like if,
go ahead.
yeah, like if I was at some place today and I had this conversation, that I was thinking about now, is that through my talk space?
Sure. Yeah, if you're thinking about it now, then yeah, you're remembering a conversation. So the conversation is still kind of the words are going through your mind again.
Mhm.
Um,
Right.
you could also be having the words going through your mind as you're planning something in the future too, or fantasizing about what you're going to do later, or even if you're planning what you're going to have for dinner, that kind of thing.
So is
Again,
that your talk space or is that your mindfulness space?
yep, that's your talk space. And that is the practice of mindfulness. In other words, what you're doing is breaking down what the thinking components are. Okay. And
Okay.
and the reason to practice that is that when you get in trouble, and the thoughts are racing, or you've got a lot of unpleasant thoughts, then you can say to yourself, okay, which part of this is mental, which part of this is seeing, and which part of this is hearing. So if you can break it down, in Unified Mindfulness, they call it untangle and be free. Or if you want to be a little sharper, it's called divide and conquer. Let's see if do we have time? We have just a couple more minutes. See if I can find it. I was going to share it and then I forgot some examples of how to use the mindfulness. Let's see. Is that it? That's a boring task. No. Do I have it here? 5. Maybe not. Well, I did share that one example that if you're getting overwhelmed by an emotion, that you can use the breaking it down. Which part of this is feeling in my body? Which part of this is thinking, and then breaking down thinking into which part is hearing or seeing. You know, you may be remembering something that was very uncomfortable or even tragic, and then you have those images going through your mind. So you can say to yourself, okay, that part is seeing, and then practice. So if you practice with simple things while you're meditating, you get used to when something big comes up, that you can then use these techniques as a way to calm the mind down. In other words, I'm remembering, let's say, pictures of those terrible people beating up a policeman on, last Wednesday. And those images may be going through my mind. So if I were going to use this technique, I would just simply sit and say, as I was watching the images in my mind with the eyes closed, I would just simply say, and maybe a feeling of anger coming up, or fear in my body. So then I would just sort of label, okay, seeing, feeling, seeing, hearing, seeing. So going back to see, hear, and feel. And that way, it's a way to calm down because now you know exactly what's happening right now. And using that really calm tone also helps to disentangle and sort of separate the strands of what's happening. Yeah. Does that sound clear? Okay. Let's see if I can find the other. There's another one, an example he used for when you're trying to sleep, if you can't sleep. Well, one of the things he says is you can, when you're trying, let's say you're having a hard time going to sleep, and instead of saying to yourself, I need to get a good night's sleep, you can say to yourself, I need to get a good night's rest. So you start to focus on, and then use the labeling of rest. Rest. In other words, maybe a lot of times I focus on my eyes and I stop the eyes from moving, and then use the word rest. Rest. So that, as he says, eventually you get a good night's rest, even if you're not getting a good night's sleep. So you can use labeling that way. So that's why I say I think it's really helpful to take that online class, because then you get some more of the nuances, because then there's rest, and then there's also noticing when everything is blank, or being able to catch when something is gone. Those kinds of, again, you're breaking down all of your experiences. So this is more of a sort of an introduction to see, hear, feel, and how do we use it to calm the mind. But there's a lot more going on than just what's going on in our mind, which, you know, if stuff's going on in our body, it's going to affect our mind. So, okay. Well, we're at the top of the hour. So
Yes, and vice versa.
what's that?
Something's going on in the body, in the mind, it affects the body.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So to be open to see, hear, and feel. So it's a great practice. It really is. Yeah. So hopefully everybody will take that class. I'll send out the resources, the list this tonight, and everybody will start taking the class, and I look forward to hearing reports next week. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Any other questions or anything? I guess not. Well, thank you all for showing up.
Well,
I
thank
hope
you.
to see you all next week.
Thank you.
Have a beautiful
Okay.
Mhm.
Bye, Donna. Thank you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody.
Thank you.
Take care.
You too. You too.